Is it realistic for France to try and stop it?
No.
This week, France and Germany announced that they will block Facebook's Libra currency in Europe. In a joint statement, the two governments said that no private entity can claim monetary power, which is inherent to the sovereignty of nations. I have a lot to say about that.
The French Finance Minister, Bruno Le Maire, warned sovereignty of nations could be at risk. Le Maire did not spell out how France plans to keep Libra out.
This week, Bruno Le Maire, Economy and Finance Minister of France, said, "I want to be absolutely clear. We cannot authorize the development of Libra on European soil." The crackdown on Libra in Europe doesn't come as a surprise to me. Libra potentially poses a huge threat to the financial system. If you have a money like Libra that is accepted all over the world, is already integrated into such things as your MasterCard, your Visa card, PayPal, your Facebook app, your Spotify app, your Uber app, and potentially all of these companies are offering discounts to incentivize you to use this currency, which I presume is how the Libra is going to work, then that is huge competitions for the banks. In fact, with negative interest rates looming, the banks may even be charging you to keep your money in the banks. You could even say that when you factor in current inflation and the fact that banks aren't offering you any interest to store your money there, you already are paying for the privilege of keeping money in the banks. Along comes a behemoth company. It joins forces with a bunch of other behemoth companies. They offer this worldwide currency and all of these perks, and they start to call into question the idea that the creation of money is only for governments. Yeah, I'd be scared too if I was the government. All the governments that have pushed back against this have all said that they don't want Libra to displace their national currency. Mnuchin, the US Secretary of the Treasury, has said this, and how it's his job to protect the US dollar. Le Maire's worried that Libra may substitute itself as a national currency. He says it would be a global currency held by a single player, which has more than 2 billion users around the world. The monetary sovereignty of states is under threat. Really, what they're saying here is they don't like the competition. People might prefer to use Libra, and therefore we should stop it.
With something the size of Facebook, you could actually create something that could challenge the dollar as a world reserve currency.
So many people would use it, and nobody would ever need to go to another currency.
That is the risk.
How delightfully unlike government to want to squash competition in order to enforce their own monopolies. But that's where we're at the moment. Government's pushing back and Libra responding by saying that they deliberately created a super long runway because they knew that there were going to be issues like this. It also makes me wonder how much of the white paper the Libra Foundation actually intends to keep in place anyway. With all of its talk of potentially decentralizing and the foundation not having the ability to censor any transactions, I well suspect that this was just a jumping off point to try to placate the crypto community, which didn't really work, by the way. Crypto people aren't the type to trust Facebook. And I presume that their intention is to make whatever concessions necessary in order to get the approval of government. Some of these concessions could get quite interesting. And by interesting, I mean awful.
The nodes that govern the blockchain could easily be given permissions, and you could have governments to have their own permissions, you could have regulators to have permissions, and you could see this actually working really well.
And by really well, he means really well for governments to be able to continue the status quo of seizing and controlling your finances at will. This is definitely the direction that I see Libra going in. I see some of the node operators becoming governments, powerful players that indeed would be able to leverage their status and coerce people if necessary to sanction certain transactions, not notarize certain transactions to the blockchain, basically continue to control finances as they're currently being controlled. Currently, those who see Libra as benign are looking at the lack of barriers to entry in the field. The Libra Foundation can create their own consortium with all these powerful players, but who's to say that Amazon and Alibaba and all these other companies won't create competing currencies out there? But if governments around the world do join the Libra Foundation board and become validators of this network, you can bet that those barriers will be erected pretty quickly to stamp out competition. If Libra ever is allowed to launch, it may be the only private currency that will be. Best case scenario is lots of competitors will exist, but if they do, you can bet that they'll never be allowed to grow large enough to be considered anything other than a novelty and definitely not a threat. Or if they are large enough, they'll all be co-opted by governments. And that's why decentralization decentralized currencies are the answer and not centralized ones. But back to Libra. Not every government is against Libra, it seems. Only the ones that have something to lose. The Libra Foundation itself is based in Switzerland, and Switzerland seems quite happy about this development. Mark Branson, the director of the Financial Market Authority, FINMA, which is the Swiss government body responsible for financial regulation, said that if Switzerland wants to become a major financial center, it's going to have to take more risks than other governments and potentially embrace things like Libra. He says, high finance can bring reputational risks. This is true everywhere in the world. But I have a hard time thinking that Switzerland should become a second-rate financial centre just to avoid such risks. He also said that the 28 members currently on the Libra Foundation are huge and successful corporations. It is interesting all the talk of financial instability that could come as a result of the Libra. The Libra Association has pushed back against this, explaining that the Libra itself will be backed by a basket of assets. The US dollar, which will make up around half, plus the euro, the yen, pound sterling, and Singapore dollar. It'll also include things like government bonds. In their pushback against the claims that the Libra could potentially disrupt economies around the world, the Libra Association has said that because the Libra will be backed by this basket of assets, it is their monetary policies that will influence the Libra through the basket and not the other way around. That's a great point, but it also misses one key fact. The Libra Association could opt to switch out any currency at any given time. Let's say one currency suddenly plummets and the Libra Association decides to switch out that currency so that the value of the Libra doesn't follow suit, then they would no longer need to hold reserves of that currency. You can imagine what that would do to that currency that they're switching out, suddenly flooding the open market with sell orders. You can predict that that would further push down an already tumbling currency. So there is a significant effect that Libra could potentially have on different currencies around the world. They would be creating substantial demand for these currencies. If governments start implementing bad monetary policy that causes their currency to become devalued, with all these global alternatives on the market, they're not so protected anymore. They're competing for usage within their citizens, and they're also competing for the business of backed currencies like the Libra. We can hope that this will make them more competitive and provide a better product, but I wouldn't hold my breath. Now, to finish off, the huge amount of talk amongst politicians about cryptocurrencies and in particular Libra over the past few months has also spurred a huge amount of mainstream media coverage on the topic. So to end this video, I wanted to share with you some of my favorite bites from this CNN clip from this week. All together, let's enjoy these wonderful facepalm moments, shall we?
Central banks have their own reserves, and if you need to, you can get the reserves to pay you back.
Central banks provide a lender of last resort, which creates a nice moral hazard, meaning that the banks can implement whatever disastrous policy they want and know that they'll be bailed out.
There's no lender of last resort underneath it.
They're trying to argue that Libra is more risky because they don't have this moral hazard in place.
Except it is backed.
I expected here that the interviewer was about to be very smart and mention how the Libra Foundation would not be doing fractional reserve banking. They would be creating a reserve that backs the currency one-to-one. So there really would be no need for a lender of last resort or for FDIC insurance or anything like that. But instead, the interview went in this direction.
It is backed in the sense that somebody paid dollars, pounds or euros to get the Libras.
In the first place. Or they could have paid Bitcoin to get them.
Or Bitcoin. So there is sort of a currency underneath it in that sense.
Oh boy. I will say this, Libra is going to force a lot of anchors and journalists to get educated about how the monetary system works, because they're going to have to talk about this stuff on air more and more, so they're going to have to understand it, hopefully at a better level than they currently are. But the more education we have about this stuff, and the more this gets passed on to the viewers, the better. So that's a good thing.
And it depends how Libras are created.
Actually, a pretty smart question. The creation of stablecoins is very interesting, and in the past has caused a lot of controversy, with people arguing that it just pumps the value of the underlying assets. But this is the interviewee's response.
So Libras are created in the same way as any other blockchain currency.
Huh? As if they're all created the same?
So that they are created without intervention of any government, any bank.
Where did he find this expert? Could someone please send him the wiki page for the e-krona, the sov, the petro?
If it's going to be the next global reserve currency, who better to run that?
How about no one? Because no one should have that much power. And that's why we love decentralized currencies like Bitcoin. Anyway, it's clear that journalists really have to start upping their game when it comes to this stuff. They have to get educated, start understanding it a bit better, find much better experts, because they're going to be covering this stuff a whole bunch more. And that's a great thing. I love that we're now having conversations about monetary policy, about how our financial infrastructure works. The more educated people get, the better their choices are. And at the moment, there are much better currency alternatives out there that people need to learn about. So here's to education in the mainstream media, and here's to the irony of the very centralized Libra project being a large catalyst over the last few months of making these conversations happen. Thanks so much for watching, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.